Hello, beautiful Virgo. Welcome back. I'm really grateful you're here today. Before we begin, just allow yourself to settle in for a moment. There is a very gentle energy surrounding your reading, almost like the silence between two hearts has been speaking louder than words ever could. Take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, and let's see where these cards are leading us today. The first card resting on the table is the Four of Swords, and I have to say, this energy feels incredibly quiet. Not empty, just quiet. It feels like someone has been trying to convince themselves that distance was the right choice. They may have withdrawn without explaining everything they were feeling, believing that time apart would somehow make their emotions fade. But the energy suggests something very different. Every day that passed seemed to invite more reflection instead of more certainty. Every quiet morning, every late evening, every familiar place only seemed to remind them of someone they couldn't quite let go of. Then the Six of Cups gently appears, and suddenly everything becomes softer. It feels like memories have been finding their way back into this person's heart without asking for permission. Little moments they once overlooked now seem impossible to forget. Your laughter, the comfort they felt around you, the way conversations with you made even ordinary days feel meaningful. Yeah, it almost feels like they're realizing they never truly left this connection. Even if their body did, some part of them has remained with you all along. What surprises me is that, on the outside, they may seem completely composed. If someone looked at them today, they might think everything is under control. They continue with work, responsibilities, daily routines. They smile when they need to smile. They answer questions. They carry on. But underneath all of that, there's another story unfolding. I feel like their heart keeps wandering back to the same place, and no amount of distraction has been able to change that. The Hermit quietly steps into the reading, and it feels as though this period of separation has become something much deeper than loneliness. Instead of simply missing you, they're beginning to examine themselves. They're asking questions they may have avoided before. What truly makes me happy? Why did I walk away from something that felt so safe? Why does everything else seem so ordinary now? These aren't easy questions, and it feels like they don't have every answer yet, but they can no longer pretend those questions don't exist. There is also a growing awareness that the life they built without you isn't bringing the peace they expected. It may look stable from the outside, but inside it feels strangely quiet in all the wrong ways, almost like they're moving through the same days over and over again without feeling fully alive. The energy suggests that they're beginning to recognize the difference between simply existing and actually feeling connected. And then, almost unexpectedly, the Ace of Cups appears. Oh my God! It doesn't arrive with dramatic promises. It simply brings a feeling, a quiet realization that maybe the love they were trying to silence never disappeared. Maybe it was only waiting beneath the surface until they were finally willing to face it. I keep feeling that your presence became a place where they could breathe without pretending to be someone else. Around you, they didn't have to perform. They didn't have to prove anything. They could simply exist. And perhaps they're only now beginning to understand how rare that truly was. It feels like their heart is slowly waking up, one realization at a time, and the path ahead may begin with something they never expected themselves to let go of. It feels like someone has been standing at the edge of their own life, looking around with fresh eyes for the first time in a long while. The Devil appears here, and what catches my attention isn't fear, it's awareness. It's almost as if they're beginning to notice how certain people, certain conversations, and even certain habits have quietly shaped the choices they've been making. Things they once accepted without question suddenly don't feel comfortable anymore. I keep sensing that this person trusted voices that sounded confident simply because they didn't yet trust their own heart. There may have been friends who always had an opinion, family members who believed they knew what was best, or circumstances that constantly whispered, "Stay where you are. Don't take the risk." Yeah, those voices once felt convincing, but something inside them has started asking whether those opinions ever truly belonged to them in the first place. The energy suggests they're becoming surprisingly observant. They're noticing little moments that never bothered them before. A conversation that leaves them emotionally drained. A room where they no longer feel welcome. People who seem more interested in control than genuine support. It's almost uncomfortable, because once you begin seeing these patterns, it's difficult to pretend they're invisible again. Death quietly settles beside those thoughts, and everything begins to shift without needing dramatic announcements. I don't feel like they're trying to destroy their entire world overnight. It feels much gentler than that, more like someone slowly taking old pictures off a wall because they no longer recognize the person they used to be. Some relationships may naturally grow quieter. Some routines may simply stop making sense. It isn't because they're becoming cold. It feels more like they're becoming honest. There is also this growing realization that the life they've been maintaining has demanded too many compromises. They may have spent years trying to fit expectations that never truly reflected who they are. The energy keeps bringing me back to this feeling of emotional exhaustion. Pretending becomes tiring after a while. Carrying everyone else's expectations becomes heavy. Somewhere inside, they're beginning to wonder what life might feel like if they finally chose peace instead of approval. The Eight of Cups almost feels like a quiet walk at sunset. Nobody is forcing them to leave anything behind. Instead, their own soul seems to be inviting them towards something that feels more authentic. They may not know exactly where they're going yet, but they seem increasingly certain about what they no longer want to carry. That certainty alone can become incredibly powerful. Oh my God! Every time your energy drifts back into this reading, everything softens again. It isn't because you solved all of their problems, it's because being with you never required them to become someone else. Around you, there was room to breathe. There was room to be imperfect, to speak honestly, to laugh without pretending, to rest without explaining why they were tired. The star begins to glow so gently across these cards that it almost feels like hope returning after a very long season. Not loud hope, not unrealistic hope, just the quiet kind that arrives when someone finally realizes healing doesn't begin by finding another person. It begins by releasing everything that kept them from recognizing what truly mattered. And with every small step they take away from what no longer belongs in their life, another truth seems to be waiting patiently to reveal itself. Something keeps drawing their attention back to you in ways they never expected. It isn't loud, and it doesn't feel obsessive. It's quieter than that. More like those moments when they're driving home and your name suddenly crosses their mind for no obvious reason. Or when a familiar song begins to play, and before they even realize it, they're smiling because it reminds them of the way you used to look at them. It feels like no matter how determined they are to keep moving forward, their heart has developed its own direction. The High Priestess appears so gently here that I almost don't want to disturb the silence surrounding her. There seems to be an awakening happening beneath the surface. This person may not be speaking much about what they're experiencing, but inside, they're listening more carefully than ever before. Their intuition has become stronger, almost impossible to ignore. They're beginning to notice little signs, unexpected dreams, familiar feelings that return without invitation. Whether they understand them or not doesn't seem to matter anymore. Something within them simply knows this connection was never as finished as they once believed. I also feel they're remembering the version of themselves that existed around you. That's what surprises them the most. It isn't only your smile or your kindness that they miss. It's who they became whenever they were with you. Around you, there was no constant pressure to defend themselves. There wasn't this exhausting need to appear stronger, smarter, or more distant than they actually felt. You somehow made vulnerability feel safe without ever asking for it. Judgment enters the reading, almost like a quiet conversation with their own conscience. There are moments when they replay old memories, not to punish themselves, but to understand them differently. Situations they once blamed on timing or misunderstanding are beginning to look very different. The energy suggests they're recognizing that fear had a much louder voice than love back then. Fear encouraged distance. Fear created assumptions. Fear kept them from saying what they truly wanted to say. Yeah, something else keeps standing out to me. They're realizing you were often trying to understand them instead of trying to change them. That realization carries a surprising amount of emotion because they may have mistaken your patience for weakness or your quiet support for something they could always return to later. Life has a strange way of showing us the value of someone's presence only after we experience their absence. The Queen of Cups feels incredibly comforting here. Every time your energy enters this reading, there's this overwhelming sense of acceptance. I don't feel like you loved them because they were perfect. It seems you loved the parts of them they struggled to love themselves. Their flaws didn't immediately push you away. Their difficult days didn't make you disappear. You held space for them in a way very few people ever have, and they're slowly beginning to understand how rare that kind of connection really is. The moon gently settles over everything, leaving certain answers hidden while revealing deeper truths at the same time. Not every emotion they're experiencing can be explained with logic anymore. They may still question themselves. They may still wonder why your presence continues to live so vividly inside their heart. But the more honestly they sit with those questions, the more one realization keeps returning. It feels less like losing someone they loved and more like discovering they never truly lost the connection at all. Only their courage to trust what it had been trying to show them from the very beginning. It almost feels like they're no longer running from the mirror. For the first time in a very long while, they're allowing themselves to sit quietly with memories they once tried to avoid. The Five of Cups appears, and the atmosphere immediately changes. There is a heaviness here, not because they're trapped in regret forever, but because they're finally willing to admit that some of the pain between you didn't happen by accident. It seems they're beginning to recognize the choices they made when fear spoke louder than honesty. I keep feeling that this person believed distance would protect them. If they stayed emotionally unavailable, they couldn't be disappointed. If they kept their walls high enough, nobody could see how deeply they actually cared. That strategy may have worked for a while, but it also kept them from receiving the very thing they had been searching for. Instead of protecting their heart, they slowly watched themselves become disconnected from it. Justice quietly settles into the reading, and I don't sense punishment here. I sense accountability. There is a meaningful difference between blaming yourself and understanding yourself. The energy suggests they're moving toward the second one. They're beginning to replay conversations with fresh eyes, moments where they became defensive instead of vulnerable, times when they questioned your intentions simply because trusting someone felt unfamiliar. Little decisions that didn't seem important back then suddenly carry a completely different weight. What touches me most is that they're beginning to imagine those same moments from your perspective. That isn't easy. It takes courage to wonder how your silence may have sounded to someone who was waiting for reassurance. It takes humility to realize that every time they pulled away, without explanation, you were left trying to understand something that was never yours to carry. They may never have intended to hurt you, but intentions and impact don't always walk the same path. The Page of Cups arrives with such gentle energy that it almost feels like someone's heart learning a new language. I don't think this person wants grand gestures anymore. They seem tired of pretending everything is fine while hoping you'll somehow read between the lines. It feels like they're discovering that vulnerability isn't weakness. Saying, "I was scared," or "I handled that badly," may actually require more strength than remaining silent ever did. Yeah, I also feel they're realizing something very important about you. You weren't asking them to become someone else. You weren't asking for perfection. You simply wanted consistency, honesty, and a place where both of your hearts could breathe without wondering when the ground might suddenly disappear beneath your feet. Looking back, they may finally understand that what felt overwhelming at the time was actually the foundation of a healthy connection. Temperance brings an entirely different rhythm into the reading. Everything begins to slow down. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, it feels like they're learning that healing happens one conversation, one choice, one honest moment at a time. There is a quiet willingness growing inside them to respond differently than they once did, to pause before reacting, to listen before assuming, to stay present instead of disappearing whenever emotions become complicated. Oh my God. There is something incredibly sincere about this energy because it no longer feels driven by guilt alone. It feels guided by genuine growth. They seem to understand that you deserved more patience, more openness, more emotional safety than they were capable of offering before. Whether every word has been spoken yet or not, their heart appears to be moving toward a version of love that is no longer built on fear, and that quiet transformation may soon ask them to make a choice they can no longer postpone. There comes a moment when carrying two different versions of your life becomes heavier than choosing just one. I feel like this person has reached that quiet crossroads. The constant back and forth that once seemed manageable no longer brings them comfort. Instead, it leaves them feeling divided. The Emperor stands firmly before this reading, and there is something remarkably different about the energy surrounding them. It isn't impulsive, it isn't driven by loneliness. It feels measured, thoughtful, and deeply intentional, as though they've finally realized that real love asks for clear decisions, not endless hesitation. For a long time, they may have believed they could keep everything exactly as it was, while somehow making room for you. Tried to balance old responsibilities, familiar environments, expectations from other people, and this connection all at once. Yeah, it may have looked possible in their mind, but their heart kept reminding them that some paths simply cannot be walked at the same time. Eventually, something had to give. The Tower enters so unexpectedly that it almost feels like the truth arriving before they were fully prepared for it. What surprises me is that this doesn't feel like destruction for the sake of pain. It feels more like illusions quietly falling away. Ideas they once defended no longer seem convincing. Excuses they've repeated for months, maybe even years, suddenly sound empty when spoken out loud. There is a strange freedom in finally admitting that what once felt safe was actually keeping them from becoming the person they wanted to be. I keep sensing that they're no longer afraid of releasing things simply because they've existed for a long time. Whether it's a relationship, a pattern, an obligation, or even an identity they've carried for years, something inside them understands that history alone isn't enough to justify staying. The energy suggests they're asking themselves a different question now. Instead of wondering what they'll lose by walking away, they're beginning to wonder what they might finally gain by moving towards something that genuinely feels alive. The Two of Pentacles still shows traces of the old uncertainty, but it doesn't seem to hold the same power anymore. They appear tired of constantly trying to make incompatible pieces fit together. Living in emotional limbo has become exhausting. Every delayed decision created another unanswered question. Every postponed conversation added another layer of distance. Deep down, they seem to understand that balance isn't created by holding on to everything. Sometimes balance arrives only after choosing what truly deserves a place in your life. The Two of Swords carries one final pause, but this pause feels completely different from the silence they've known before. It isn't avoidance. It feels like someone taking one last deep breath before opening a door they've been staring at for far too long. They may still have fears. They may still wonder how everything will unfold. That's only natural. Yet the energy keeps suggesting that uncertainty is no longer stronger than their desire to live honestly. Oh my God. I feel like they're beginning to picture a future that isn't built on temporary emotions anymore. They're imagining ordinary mornings, honest conversations, quiet evenings, and the kind of stability they once thought would feel boring, but now recognize as something deeply meaningful. This isn't about chasing excitement. It's about finding someone whose presence feels like home instead of another battle to survive. What touches me most is that this decision doesn't seem to come from desperation. It comes from maturity. They aren't choosing you because every other option disappeared. They're choosing you because, after everything they've experienced, they finally understand which connection continued to remain true while everything else slowly changed. And that realization seems ready to find its place in the world beyond their thoughts. There is a softness settling over this reading that feels very different from everything we've seen before. It isn't the softness that comes from avoiding difficult conversations. It feels like the quiet peace that arrives after someone has spent a long time confronting themselves. The Hierophant stands in front of us, and I keep feeling that this person no longer wants love to exist only inside their imagination. They want something they can protect, nurture, and show up for every single day. Their understanding of commitment seems to have changed in ways they may never have expected. I feel like they're carrying an apology inside their heart, but it doesn't seem to be made of beautiful words alone. In fact, words may no longer feel sufficient to them. They seem to understand that trust isn't rebuilt through promises, it's rebuilt through consistency, through showing up when they say they will, through choosing honesty when silence once felt easier, through becoming someone whose actions quietly speak before their voice ever has to. The Knight of Cups moves gently across the reading, and the energy feels sincere rather than dramatic. This isn't someone trying to sweep you off your feet with grand declarations because they suddenly fear losing you. It feels much calmer than that, almost like they've finally realized that vulnerability isn't something to avoid anymore. They're beginning to understand that courage sometimes looks like sitting across from someone you deeply care about and simply saying, "I know I hurt you. I know I can't erase that. But I'm willing to become someone different from the person who caused that pain." What touches me is that while they've been changing, you've also been changing. The energy around you feels steadier than before. You're no longer standing in one place hoping they'll eventually choose you. You've continued living your life. You've learned how to pour love back into yourself. There is a quiet confidence surrounding your energy that wasn't fully there before, and I almost feel like they can sense it even from a distance. Instead of pushing them away, it seems to inspire them. They recognize that if they want to be part of your future, they have to arrive with the same maturity you've been building within yourself. The Ten of Pentacles carries such a comforting presence. I don't immediately think about luxury or perfect endings when I see it here. I think about simple mornings where two people no longer wonder if the other one is leaving. I think about conversations where honesty feels natural instead of frightening. I think about laughter returning without the weight of unresolved fear sitting quietly between every smile. It feels like they're beginning to understand that lasting happiness isn't created through intense emotions alone. It's created through thousands of ordinary moments shared with someone who feels safe enough to call home. The Lovers appears at the very end, and there is something incredibly peaceful about its presence. It doesn't feel like fate forcing two people together. It feels like two hearts arriving at the same place after taking very different journeys. Both of you seem to have learned lessons that couldn't be rushed. Both of you appear to understand yourselves more deeply than you once did. That changes everything because relationships built from awareness often carry a very different foundation than relationships built from longing alone. Yeah, I keep feeling that this connection has become less about proving who was right or wrong, and more about discovering whether two people are willing to meet each other with open hearts, clearer boundaries, and a deeper respect than they knew how to offer before. If that moment arrives, it may not look as dramatic as anyone imagined. It may simply begin with two people choosing, one quiet day at a time, to love each other in a way that finally feels like peace.